Hey everybody, Smart Silver Stacker here. One of the most important characteristics of physical gold and silver bullion is that they are assets without counterparty risk. And all this means is that when you hold gold or silver, you're not relying on the promise of a third party in order to keep the value held in your precious metals. Because in the case of precious metals, the metal itself is the value. Gold and silver have a number of unique characteristics that makes them very desirable. And both metals are fairly scarce and they're hard to pull out of the ground, takes a lot of energy and work to do so, and therefore they have intrinsic value. And that has pretty much been the case for the past 2,700 years, essentially without disruption. But I've been hearing a lot of talk lately in the media and also from politicians that show that a lot of folks in the West don't really understand gold and silver and why they're valuable and what kind of a role they play in a world monetary and economic system. Specifically, I've been hearing a lot of outlets refer to gold as a loophole that the Russians are using to get around sanctions. And I think that this lack of fundamental understanding of precious metals by the leadership here in the West could really lead to some significant consequences moving forward. And that's what I want to talk about in this video. We've got a lot of interesting stuff to cover, so let's get to it. So this is the Department of the Treasury website. They've got a frequently asked questions page here regarding the Russian harmful foreign activities sanctions. And this is regarding an executive order that was signed by President Biden. It's Executive Order 14024, and it has to do with gold-related sanctions. So I'll read you a couple of the bullet points here just to kind of give you an idea of what this order is talking about. It says, for example, Executive Order 14024 authorizes sanctions against persons determined to be responsible for or complicit in or to have directly or indirectly engaged or attempted to engage in deceptive or structured transactions or dealings to circumvent U.S. sanctions, including through the use of such assets as gold or other precious metals. Now, I'm not going to read the rest of this to you guys. You can go check out this page if you're really curious about these sanctions and this executive order. But the gist of it is that anybody who buys gold from Russia or anybody who facilitates other people buying gold from Russia, if you're a U.S. citizen and also if you're a citizen of one of the G7 nations, you're going to be subject to sanctions as well. And here's a headline from March 24th covering this executive order and some of these gold sanctions on Russia. The headline is, "Can the U.S. and allies freeze Russian gold? Yes, here's how." Now, of course, right off the bat, I would tend to disagree with this headline in that America thinking that it can control what Russia does with its gold reserves. I think there might be a little bit of hubris there, but we'll take a look at what the article says. So first, how would the sanctions apply? The U.S. announcement to block gold transactions was done alongside Group of Seven and European Union allies that will also impose the gold reserve ban. New guidance from the U.S. Treasury Department states that American individuals, gold dealers, distributors, wholesalers, buyers, and financial institutions are generally banned from buying, selling, or facilitating gold-related transactions involving Russia and the various parties that have been sanctioned. I don't necessarily know that lawmakers in the U.S. can control what Russia does with their gold. However, they certainly can control what U.S. citizens are able to do. Now, I don't know how much gold Russia was selling to U.S. citizens before this executive order, but I think that the idea that by preventing Americans from buying gold, that you're going to prevent Russians from selling gold, that is perhaps misguided. And then the article goes on to say, what kind of impact would this have on Russia? The move should further impact the country's ability to launder money and will, in effect, apply secondary sanctions on people who trade in gold with Russia. Experts say it is another way to close sanctions loopholes and increase economic pressure on Russian entities, said Rachel Ziemba, an adjunct senior fellow at the Center for a New American Security. The Center for a New American Security, I'm not extremely familiar with that. Sounds like some kind of a think tank. If the folks who work over there think that selling gold is a loophole in sanctions, again, I don't really think they grasp gold's nature as a monetary metal outside of the control of any particular nation, because selling gold is not a loophole for the Russians to avoid sanctions. That's the whole reason they've got gold in the first place. To refer to it as a loophole is, I don't know, it doesn't seem like the right word to me. I think that the Russians understood that, this day might come, and that's why they were stocking up on gold. And speaking of Russia stocking up on gold, how much gold do they really have? Well, we can take a look at this chart from tradingeconomics.com, which shows you Russian gold reserves from 2000 to the present. And you can see that they really started accumulating gold back in 2008. Around that time, they had less than 500 metric tons. It's a pretty nice upward slope here where they began to acquire it then, and then they kind of accelerated their purchases beginning around 2014. And that original impetus, I would imagine that Russia saw what was going on in the world economy. They saw that 2008 financial crisis, and it made them understand that they should be getting their hands on hard money, sound money, and that's what they did. And now they went from under 500 metric tons back then to today. Looks like the latest number was right around 2,300 metric tons, so that's a pretty big increase. And of course, this is just the official numbers. This is what Russia is reporting. It may in fact be the case that they have significantly more gold than this. Who knows, what their actual reserves are compared to what they have reported so far. Speaking of gold reserves, just to take a look real quick at this chart here of the U.S. gold reserves. Now, I don't know what this little uptick is here back in the early 2000s, but you can see that the whole range of this chart is very narrow, and essentially we've got a little over 8,100 metric tons of gold, supposedly. I mentioned that in a video recently, and I didn't question the gold reserves of the U.S., I was just quoting the number, and I got a ton of comments about how the U.S. doesn't really have that much gold. Now, I don't know if they do or not. I'm kind of agnostic on that point. I don't see any specific reason to question whether or not the U.S. actually has those 8,000 some metric tons of gold. However, there is the fact that the gold reserves of the U.S. haven't been audited in over half a century. I don't know the exact last date when the gold reserves were audited. I think it was back in the 50s. Maybe we have it, maybe we don't. I don't see any reason to specifically think that we don't have our own gold reserves, but a lot of the people watching the video the other day seemed to think that that was the case. So I'm going to have to say I'm kind of agnostic on that point, although it would be nice if they audited the gold reserve. Seems like something that should happen on a fairly regular basis, but it's never occurred in my lifetime. And then, also China, here's their gold reserves. You can see they have almost 2,000 metric tons, but they're in kind of the same boat as Russia. They might have a lot more gold than that we just don't know about. Back to the gold loophole thing. This is the website of Senator Angus King. It's his Senate blog. I guess all the senators get kind of like a little blog that they can put stuff up on. And this is also from March 24th. And I'm just going to read a little quote here from the senators that were being talked about in this post. Putin's playbook is clear. He can and will use any loophole to evade sanctions and prop up the Russian economy. Obviously, this is warfare. It's economic warfare. Sanctions are an act of war, an act of economic warfare. And so, of course, just like in any form of warfare, Russia is going to do everything that they can to come out on top. And that is, I think, perhaps the thing that is really lost on Western lawmakers here, who I think are kind of shooting themselves in the foot by passing all of these laws. Because here's the thing. Russia selling gold is not a loophole. It's a move. It's a strategic move. To refer to it as a loophole is dismissive. And I don't think that we should do that because, Russia has made a lot of somewhat savvy moves lately, I think. They've put that soft peg in of the ruble to gold by offering to buy gold at a fixed price. They've also demanded payment for their oil and gas in rubles, which is also going to support their currency a lot. And here's the thing. The U.S. seems to have this hubris where they think that because we have the world reserve currency, we can do whatever we want with that currency and everybody else has to toe the line and do exactly what we say. As the holder of the world reserve currency, that is a privilege that is essentially granted to us by the rest of the world. And if we want to keep that privilege, we have to be good custodians of that world reserve currency. We haven't done that so far. And these sanctions are just kind of the final stage of that, the most recent stage, where we've shown that, if you don't toe the line, you don't do what we like, we can just seize your dollar reserves. You have no recourse. And so, the thing that we're finding out with gold is that we can't really do that so easily with Russia, because even if you prevent American citizens from buying gold, even if you prevent citizens in the G7 nations from buying gold, Russia's going to be able to find a buyer for its gold. You think that China isn't going to buy Russian gold? You think that India isn't going to buy Russian gold? And India, by the way, that's a country with a real history of sound money usage. They really understand gold's role as a store of value. If you've ever been to an Indian wedding, for example, it's customary to be giving the bride and groom gifts of gold. So, do you think that India is going to skip the opportunity to buy Russian gold at a discount because Americans and Westerners have been cut out of that bidding process? Because that's all these laws and these sanctions are going to do. It's going to potentially drive the price of gold up, I guess, a little bit in the US because there won't be as much of a supply if we can't buy Russian gold anymore. And then outside of the US and the G7 nations, for nations that can buy Russian gold, their gold will just be a little bit cheaper because there won't be as much competitive bidding on Russian gold. So the real winners from these sanctions, it's not going to be the US or Russia necessarily, although I don't think it's going to make a huge difference for Russia. But the real winners are going to be India and China and other nations who are able to go in and buy Russian gold at a discount. And ultimately, all of these sanctions, all of this idea that we can control what other countries do economically, we're trying to clamp down, and we see the fact that gold is an asset without counterparty risk that Russia can rely on, even if we paralyze their dollar reserves and their ability to participate in dollar payment systems around the world. This is all going to be something that comes back to haunt us. It is very clear that we don't understand gold's role as sound money, as hard currency, as honest money that can't be controlled by any nation. But nonetheless, just because we don't understand it doesn't mean that it's not true. I think that moving forward, all of these sanctions, and specifically, the sanctions on gold and locking Russia out of our dollar systems, all of this, in the short run, it might have some, benefit for us. It might inflict a little bit of pain on our enemies. But in the long run, it is going to undermine the dollar. It's going to undermine the dollar's status as the world reserve currency. It's going to really come back to bite us. And also, as a result of this, the price of gold, in dollars at least, could appreciate significantly as the purchasing power of the dollar is undermined around the world. All of these sanctions and the desire of nations to control money, and also the advent of things like central bank digital currencies, which are going to be much more tightly controlled than our current monetary system and our current dollar. All of this makes me want to get my hands on some more gold and silver. What do you think? Let me know in the comments down below. Do you think that gold and selling gold is just a loophole, or do you think that gold is real money that can't be controlled by any nation? If you guys like this video and you'd like to see more like it, check out the videos that are popping up on your screen right now, and I will catch you next time. Thank you all very much for watching. Smart Silver Stacker, out.